Firstly, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. We want to cover this topic of medical cannabis, and it's quite wide, diverse, but we'll do our best to do it. Before we start anything, I think the best thing to do is for everyone to introduce yourselves. My name's Kev, I'm one of the creative directors at Hemp CBD Media. We've been creating this content, and as the person that I am, I'm always trying to understand more about it. I'm quite naive about this sector, but that is a good thing, I think. It gives me an opportunity to ask some questions that maybe might be common practice for you all because you're in the world. Zulfiqur, do you want to explain who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Zulfiqur, and I run a company called CBD Consultants. So we provide range of services to medical cannabis industry, including licensing, farming, product development. So it's quite diversified range of services which we provide through that. My experience, as Mike knows, is biopharmaceuticals. And my area of interest has always been medical cannabis, but since the last decade, it's more and more towards medical cannabis than CBD. So that's it. That's me.
Great. I'm Jonathan. I'm Group MD of a company called Lyphe Group. Lyphe Group is an end-to-end ecosystem for the medical cannabis market in the UK. My background is in consulting and marketing and digital builds. I exited a company in 2017 and I brought a CBD company to the UK market in 2018. And then I exited that to a European fund, which then morphed into what is now called Lyphe Group. There's 4 businesses inside the company. We train doctors, we have clinics where private doctors see patients. We have a pharmacy and we have an import distribution business.
And I'm Mike Barnes. I'm a neurologist and been involved with cannabis for about 20 years or so. Initially with Sativex, and the first cannabis medicine produced by DW Pharma, and then more latterly, generally in the cannabis for medicine space, if you like. I work with John at Lyphe, in fact, so I won't reiterate what he said about Lyphe. I do various other consultancies, we're called Maple Tree Consultancy. And a lot of media work trying basically to promote cannabis as a medicine, and at the moment focusing on getting doctors to prescribe it.
Amazing.
I'm Callie Seaman. I am a director of a company called Aqua Laboratories, which make liquid fertiliser for the hydroponic industry. I'm working with a number of different licensed cultivators within this country as well to help increase the secondary metabolites within that plant. So there's less processing needs to be done to the plant and less formulation needs to be done to the plant and alteration of that. So the actual doctors can have confidence in what they're prescribing. I'm involved with a number of different other projects as well. Involved with Campass, a patient advocacy group, again wanted to educate people and remove that stigma and really kind of remove that everybody thinks that it's just stoners, and that's what cannabis is about. Cannabis is much more than that, and actually getting the education out about it being a medicine, and as I say, it's everybody can have access to that.
Hi. Hey, I'm Mammon, Oliver Mammon. I'm Chief Infusionologist at Taylor Mammon. Shall I look over there? Look at you. Fine. So look at everyone. Yes, I'm Chief Infusionologist at Taylor Mammon. Taylor Mammon is an incubator and accelerator for companies looking to enter the world of CBD and to enter the legal side of the UK cannabis market. My job is actually, I design products. I design mathematically accurate bioavailable products, products with a purpose, products which actually work. There's a lot of misunderstanding on the marketplace as to what CBD can do, and there are a lot of limitations when products are not manufactured correctly. And, as a patient, as someone who, got into this industry basically to help himself, I got into this industry in, must have been 2013, 2014 is when I first started playing around with CBD to kind of help others. Before that, I was using it for myself. I mean, I've been involved in this industry for a long time, but it's different for me. It's all about manufacturing something for the end user to actually find some benefit from, and it's about creating something that almost we can be proud of as an organization, as opposed to creating something which we can be profitable from. We're quite large distributors and quite large manufacturers, and we we have hands in like 250 brands on the marketplace, and but it's always about the product working. It's always about that customer satisfaction and that end user getting what they seek for from the product. We also do things with education and recruitment and consultancy, and just really trying to help this marketplace grow into what it needs to be as opposed to what it's going to be.
I guess the first thing that I wanted to touch on is, what can cannabis do within the medicinal market? I know it's a very large question. I look at both Mike and Zulfiqur in terms of their years of experience with this drug. I just wanted to know, for our audience who might not understand it as well, what is it that cannabis can do for us, and kind of a little bit about the history of Sativex and where it came from, why was it created?
Okay, where will I start? The first thing to say is cannabis has been used in medicine for 5,000-6,000 plus years. So it's not you'd think by reading the papers sometimes it's a brand new discovery. It's not at all. So it's been a very long, distinguished history as a medicine that was only disrupted in around 1920s, 1930s when pure politics got in the way. And now it's lovely to see, nearly 100 years, 80 years later, that things are turning around again. So it's got a very long, distinguished history of being used as a medicine. The first people to develop as a medicine was GW Pharma, and they did a great job. There's a lot of very distinguished scientists in GW. They first had to push it, if you like, down the pharmaceutical route. That was the only way to get the product to market, and in a sense still is. So they produced Sativex, which is a combination of THC and CBD largely, and used and licensed in the UK for management of drug-resistant spasticity in multiple sclerosis, although obviously it's an antispastic agent, whatever the cause of the spasticity. And they developed that as the first medicine, and then we've seen that was a long time ago now, 20 plus years. It's not used much because NICE in its wisdom then said it wasn't cost effective. So except in Wales, if you're Welsh it is cost effective, and if you don't live in Wales it's not cost effective, strangely. Something about the Welsh. So the last 2 years really in the UK we're talking about here, the world's changed, and we've seen a lot of very good media campaigns, mainly focused on children with drug-resistant epilepsies. And the result of that media campaign, the law changed last November, just over 12 months ago. We thought then that was a great day. It was, in a sense, that we'd solve the problem and doctors would go out and prescribe and everything in the garden would be lovely. It isn't, because there's been not one single NHS prescription written since last November. So we've got a long way to go in terms of educating doctors. What it can be used for is a whole range of things which would take the rest of the hour. So I'm sure there's 4 other people around this table, so I'll shut up in a minute.
I'm really happy to sit back and get an education.
What it can be used for very briefly is most people would use it for pain. That's 68% of the prescriptions we're talking about here. It's also very useful for spasticity, as I mentioned earlier, with Sativex. The CBD is very helpful for anxiety and everything associated with anxiety, like PTSD. It's nausea and sickness. It's excellent for drug-resistant epilepsy, again, mainly but not exclusively CBD. And then there's a whole range of 20, 30 other symptoms that, mainly symptoms that can be helped. So it's a big revolutionary change in medicine. We're seeing botanical medicine come back to the forefront where it always used to be. And a little bit of a move away from pure pharmaceutical medicine, which I think is refreshing. At that point, I will shut up and let someone else have a go.
So I've got to really agree with Mike that, NICE is National Institute of Cost Effectiveness, basically, isn't it? So they'd always look at the cost very closely. And one thing which I've learned over years and years, that they are more reactive NHS rather than proactive. So it's coming, it's going to take time. But what I see, Mike, that the way in medical cannabis, which we have already started, is through specials medicine. So as law says, you can use as a specials, and we have devised a way to do it. Because you touched on the history, actually in BPC 1943, there is still a method to drive a tincture. And from that tincture, actually, you can standardize various products. And because this is one strain, one type, and still that strain is in Kew Gardens. And the guy which I was mentioning, Dr. Tom Chapman, who was involved with the discovery of Sativex. So they started from groundwork, and they were going around central London with Jeffrey Guy and Brian Whittle, and they were talking to these skunk addicts which had MS. That's what you feel after using it. And they used to describe the benefits. So hence came the product, but initially, before getting synthesizing and all that sort of stuff, they started with specials. And that's how they got into it. And then the drug was discovered, in lab in Prof, actually. So it's still, say there is a lot of room, and there are many products which can come. And say at the moment, if we look at it, with the specials, there are, we are talking medical cannabis. There are drugs which are more addictive than cannabis. For instance, anorectics. We are supplying 16 million tablets of phentermine, which is actually an anorectic agent. But phentermine is amphetamines. It's derived from amphetamines. So these are those drugs. So I personally believe at the moment we can do it. We can support the system because with Sativex, the problem is, there are patients, there are quite a lot of patients, and but obviously it's not going to be prescribed in England. In Wales, it's going to be due to NICE endorsement. With regards to the other products, there are quite a few products which can come to the market during the interim period. And, we can supply through specials. You said CQC, they can, with these anorectics, for instance, there were different clinics which were set up and down the country. So we can do the same thing. We are changing few of those clinics into pain clinics, basically. Amazing. And those pain clinics there, because again, through that BPC which I was mentioning, that was used in NHS for about 7-8 years for migraine and for various pains. And again, we can do that, because as per specials law, if a clinician is ready to take the responsibility of a patient, then a qualified pharmacist on a script for that particular patient can dispense that script. So where does the product come from in that situation? So this is okay. So this is the same. We are talking to MHRA, and I don't know if you know Linda. She don't agree with the testing method from that BPC 1942. There is a tincture which this gentleman, Dr. Tom Chapman, he has derived, and it is the same strain as it was in BPC 1942. And from that tincture, he can sort of formulate various products.
But you want to synthesize it?
Yes, synthesize.
Yeah, so synthetics are just the worst thing in the world. And that's the problem. It's I don't know if I'm changing the subject a little bit. If I am, steer me back on course. But we're talking about a medical application of a plant. And Mike Barnes said it's very important, it's nicer that we're moving away from pharmaceuticals. But it sounds like all you really want to do is make cannabis a pharmaceutical, but cannabis is not. Cannabis is a grassroots industry, and if you look at this world around us, which we are all part of, when none of us have started it, we're not the Raphael Michelins, we're not the BBC 1942 gentleman you're speaking about. We are all bandwagon jumpers who are jumping into an industry. Even Mike, you read an article 20 years ago which sparked your creativity. You didn't sit there and and find THC and find CBD. So we're all bandwagon jumpers. So, but we're jumping on the bandwagon of something organic, and we're looking to transition it into something synthetic. And the whole world, like if you go back Go back 150 years, ibuprofen came from a plant. That's what ibuprofen did. And then you took the ibuprofen from a plant. They would make teas. They would make things like that. You would take the ibuprofen. It would, reduce your inflammation. So what happens is pharmaceutical companies get hold of ibuprofen. They synthesize it. They turn it into a pharmaceutical. And now, if you take too many of them, you can destroy your liver. I mean, it's like they take something organic and natural, which is not detrimental, and they turn it into something detrimental. And this, my biggest fear as a patient and as someone who designs products, as someone who uses naturals and organics in order to create things which individuals in the marketplace need. My biggest fear is that pharmaceuticals come in and they change things, because they don't have to change things. What they have to do is they have to understand that there's a system, and if the system is followed, then there will be benefit. If you change the system, then what you're doing is you're creating a new system. So you're not creating the medical cannabis market, you're creating the synthetic cannabis market. And it's very important to understand from a pharmaceutical perspective that that's not what patients need or want. I understand from a money-making perspective it's the way forward, but the medical industry as a whole keeps on focusing on this, like you said, the cost effectiveness. But the grey area.
You've got a purist view, which is right.
No, I don't have a purist view. I don't have a purist view because I'm not an activist, and I'm not for pro-legalization. I'm for people like this gentleman who do things properly, because I could never do what you do. But what I want you to do is I want you to do what you do properly.
That's what
do you understand? It's not purist. It's not purist. It's something different. Sorry.
I mean, just to validate what I meant by that, there's two schools of thought in this industry. There's one which is full spectrum cannabis plant, and the use of that as medicine, and then there's the other one which is pharmaceutical led, probably with a synthetic focus, and actually. They're both right.
Where in the world has there ever been a synthetic-led cannabis trial that's actually been beneficial to patients?
No,
it's never happened. So that's why I don't understand.
But you have to understand that there's different systems that are in play here. So the pharmaceutical world are looking at it from their perspective, which is RCT focus, which is therefore best when it's single APIs. Single APIs come from the synthetics. So synthetics give them the stability they need to be able to produce the drugs they need to produce.
Or isolates.
But or isolates, absolutely. But they're not there yet. They're not there yet. There's a process. There's a journey. So they're over here, and then on the other side, you've got people like us, the full spectrum cannabis plant medicine industry, and then those people have a perspective on how that plant is beneficial by condition for that patient. The reality is that those two worlds are going to have to meet at some point, and the trajectory for how this is going to become a mass market NHS product is actually, unfortunately for probably all of us around the table in some way, more sided towards what the pharmaceutical industry currently looks like today. So if you look at some of the largest brands that are producing products that are distributing around the world, they are actually stacking cannabinoids right today. They're saying, okay, this is a full spectrum or broad spectrum product, and we're just going to extract the different cannabinoids and we're going to put them back together again in a personalized medicine format. And that makes it more pharmaceutical. That's why Tilray are connected to the pharmaceutical world, because that's how they produce their drugs.
Talking about like bottom-up construction, yeah?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So we're going to see a segue into this kind of, we're in this kind of quasi-pharmaceutical world at the moment, right? We have to close that gap, and we have to make it more mainstream. And unfortunately, the way to make it more mainstream is to say, how do we take cannabinoids out? How do we stabilize them, standardize their condition, and then produce medicines off the back of that?
I mean, can I add to that? Is that I think that we need to look at the consumer and consumer safety. We need to be looking to make sure the product that they are getting is safe. So it hasn't got things like salmonella in, it hasn't got things like aspergillus in, which are going to cause more diseases. The idea of actually having an organic product is I love the idea, but unfortunately when you bring organics into it, you also bring contamination that will cause worse diseases that will occur. And unfortunately the pharmaceutical industry are actually focused on actually product safety and consumer safety as well. I can see both sides, and this marrying of it needs to occur. But what also needs to occur, and I feel, is that if someone chooses to want to grow their own organically, they need to be able to have access to labs that they can have their product tested, so they know what they're consuming, they know it is free of solvents, they know it's free of heavy metals, pesticides, and they know exactly what ratio they're getting. They know what they are taking, and it's about consumer safety, and that's what we need to focus on. There's a choice as well. Somebody is quite happy to take an isolate and they feel safer taking that. If a person is happy to take an isolate and they feel safer than taking something they've bought off the street or something that they don't fully understand what is in there, they are not going to heal as well, because healing is also about what's going off in the mind. It's not just about taking that active. And if you're confident in the product you're taking and that placebo effect works as well, that's got to be better for the consumers.
I think the two at the moment can run. I can see the value in the pharmaceutical approach, because then you can research what CBG does in isolation, what CBN does in isolation. Fine, but that would, if we just go only down that route, we miss out what I think is a very valuable product of the plant, which is the entourage effect, which I firmly believe in, that there's more value to the totality of the plant than the individual components. So I think we need the pharmaceutical approach, that's fine, but we shouldn't think that's not the be-all and end-all. I think we need to develop, like most countries have, is something separate, like an Office of Medicinal Cannabis, that looks slightly differently at a botanical product. They can look at the evidence in a slightly different way and not be too obsessed with double-blind placebo-controlled studies, which don't lend itself to the plant very well at all. They can look at evidence, they can look at the supply chain, they can look at the quality of the product, because we need to put a different standard on the quality of a plant than the quality of a pharmaceutical. As long as it's safe and reproducible and consistent, I haven't a problem with that. So I think we do, in parallel, I think a pharmaceutical approach to understand the science behind it and produce things like Sativex and Epidiolex, perfectly good way to do it. But at the same time, we need a botanical, if you like, approach to getting that richness of the medicine to the people who need it. And
that's what 2021
down
will do.
the road, they'll meet.
And that's 2021. You know him, it's David Nutt. Yeah, David Nutt. He's the best, and it's him, and it's basically like King's, Imperial. You know, they've all kind of partnered up together, and they're going to destroy the marketplace. It's like one of my buddies is one of the is part of the trial. She's like she's a neuroscientist analyzing neurology. I've got another friend of mine who's working on like the analytics of blood samples and stuff for the trial, and they are literally just blown away. And one of the really exciting points is that they're looking at other forms of administration than flour, other forms of getting cannabinoids into the system than flour, and he's amazing. He is amazing. God bless him, man.
Just to touch on this as well. Obviously, the NICE guidelines kind of said we need more testing. Like, how do and you've just come up with this kind of two-phased approach. Are we not? And I might be speaking out of turn, but aren't we trying to shoehorn a drug, a plant that's got so much capabilities down this RCTs and making it trying to fit? And this is where this kind of, I guess, the pharma...
And it doesn't fit.
And it doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit.
So, I mean, I guess from there, what are we doing to try and convince them otherwise? Is kind of my next question.
Well, we need, and I think probably if we just adopt the present system, we'll never convince people. The MHRA and their like, for understandable historical reasons, are obsessed with double-blind placebo-controlled studies, and everything else is rubbish. If you look at the NICE report, they rejected 9,000 plus studies of cannabis and epilepsy and looked at just 4, which is just crazy and ridiculous. So I don't think we'll change the mindset of those at that level of the pharmaceutical trade, if you like. And I think we need that approach when we look at APIs or just individual isolate products. Fine, you can do that with a double-blind placebo-controlled study, but I say we do need a different acceptable approach with a different way of looking at the science, because a plant does not lend itself to a pharmaceutical route. Full stop.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think that what you exactly said, that we actually need to remarket this, because this is it's this perception of it. We really do need to give it a whole new name to remarket it. And as much as I hate marketing, I'm a scientist, and there's nothing worse than sitting in a room full of marketers and they want to rip your ideas to bits. But we do need to remarket it, and we need to get people.
I just want to share a story with you. It's just a stigma attached to it, and people which are working within this, they are even concerned, not to say cannabis. So I was a keynote panelist. You missed that one, the London Medical Cannabis Conference. So I went there looking for it. It was in London, surprise, surprise. So I just, where is the conference? So there was a board which said the medical conference. So people which are organizing that, they were, yes, so it's just a stigma attached to it. So
what is the difference between, from your perspectives, what's the difference between skunk and medical cannabis? I'm asking you.
Yeah.
No, and when you hear the word skunk and you hear the word medical cannabis, do you think of different things?
No, I don't.
And that's the problem with the world. I know you don't, and I know Dr. Barnes over here is smarter than hell, and I know that it's your industry, so you're not going to see that. But I'm saying from a pharmaceutical perspective, you know, it's this demonization of skunk in the media. It's still going on. But fact of the matter is it's all skunk, and without skunk, we wouldn't have a medical marijuana industry. Now, fine, yeah, there are some strains where there's not enough CBD, but fact of the matter is, if those strains were used the way they should be used, they will never be released as flowers onto the open marketplace anyway. They'll be used for the fact that they contain 30% THC to be extracted. They've got high levels of terpenes to be extracted, and the product itself is so valuable. It's just the way it's being delivered.
Obviously, we've talked about how the legislation changed last year, and that actually there's no prescriptions against that legislation. I mean, I guess the biggest question is, why is it not working? Like, what are we not doing?
There are prescriptions against that regulation, against the rescheduling. There's just no NHS.
All private.
Sorry, NHS prescription.
Yeah.
And I think the real problem about that, just that specific question, is the ignorance of the doctors. And I don't mean that rudely. It's just doctors have never been taught about the endocannabinoid system. Most haven't even heard of it, let alone what to prescribe, what sort of cannabis should be, what strain is best for this. And there's a lot we don't know, but there's equally a lot that we can reassure doctors and enough to prescribe the existing product. Exactly. And that's an important point. So I think the focus today has to be doctor education. The law is there, it's not perfect, it needs adjusting, there's things around it we could do better, like allowing GPs to prescribe, for example. The supply chain's fairly awful at the moment. I think all of those problems will be reduced in their difficulty when we get more prescriptions written. So that is the absolute key.
I believe that it's fair to say globally that we all want the patients to get what they need, right?
Exactly. And can I add something to this? Because within NHS it's completely difficult to make it a part of the system. And once it's a part of the system, then it can run forever. So at the moment, the predicament is, first of all, clinicians, they are not aware which are the right patients. Secondly, from who's going to fund the product, and important bit, from where to source the product. So there are all these gaps. Unless we're not going to fill these, I mean, there are clinicians which are very much ready to use it, but they don't even know from where to get these products.
Well, yeah. So our company has trained doctors who are prescribing, and those patients are getting those scripts fulfilled. So they're coming to our pharmacy, and our pharmacy is using our import business to go and get the product and bringing it back and delivering it to the pharmacy, to the patient. Oils, flowers, capsules.
And THC oils and stuff like that, like an RSO or like a tincture, like a blended tincture as well?
It's blended tinctures.
So like 1,000 milligram or something like that, and 4 milligrams of drop type thing?
The majority of the product we're bringing back is from the Transvaal in The Hague.
Very cool, very cool. Good man.
So they take the Bedrocan flower and they turn it into their brand, which is Bedra Light.
Good man.
And we're working hard to bring other product into the country. I mean, the supply chain definitely needs some work, and certainly there's things that are in play that really go against patients getting hold of cannabis easily. I mean, the licenses required from the Home Office and the MHRA are just time consuming and costly. On top of what, unfortunately, is private prescriptions, so the patient is having to pay for that as well.
I guess the next thing that I want to talk about, I spoke to a doctor in preparation for this, that's currently working in the NHS, working in a pretty reputable London hospital, and I said, what would you want to ask? And the simplest question, what are the health risks of cannabis, of utilising cannabis? What is that patients need to consider? And what can we share with them?
But it's important to know that, and any medicine, any doctor prescribes for any condition, you've got to weigh up the benefits against the risks. Now, the benefits of cannabis are well known. Some would say the risks are higher than they outweigh the benefits. I disagree with that fundamentally. And the risks, again, it's a problem of labelling cannabis just as cannabis. It depends on the THC content on one hand, on the CBD content on the other. That's simplistic, but CBD has virtually no side effects. That's not totally true, but it's very, very safe. THC in high dosage can have an effect on psychosis, there's no doubt about that. For vulnerable individuals who have a history of psychosis or a family history, I wouldn't prescribe a high THC or THC product. It can have other conditions, it can affect the heart rate, I wouldn't prescribe it immediately after heart attacks or strokes. There's a list, like any medicine, where you'd either not prescribe it or you'd be cautious about prescribing it. But that's the risk side. You've got to look at the benefit. And if you've got a child with multiple seizures who haven't responded to anything, then of course your risk-benefit ratio changes, because what have you got to lose? That child hasn't got anything else to try, and his brain is being damaged by multiple seizures, may die as a result of those seizures. So you always, and any doctor, you've got to weigh up the risks and the benefits, and the risks of cannabis are there and they're real and they're definite, but they are small, usually, in comparison to the benefits for the individuals we're talking about.
With regards to CBD, you mentioned that there are some risks. Are there any?
Well, they're relatively speaking insignificant.
Okay.
They're not totally. It can be sedative, which sometimes is a good thing. You don't want that in some people with some conditions. It is psychoactive. However we define that, we can argue about that forever.
Anandamides,
but
pathway.
It is.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it can make you a little bit dizzy.
We calculated LD50.
Yeah.
And that is for a dog.
Yeah.
And that was 3.5 kilo.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkably...
So can you explain what LD50 is?
It's a lethal dose to kill half of the population of studied subjects.
Yeah, it's massive for
so
CBD.
3.5
kilo for a dog.
per dog?
Yeah, one dog.
So if you give a dog 3.5 kilos of CBD, they die. But if you give a dog 3.5 kilos of dog food, they'll die.
They will die. So I'm talking about safety. No, I'm talking about the safety aspect of it.
What sort of dogs did you use in your son? No, because I have a dog, and I'll be honest with you, I feel a bit sick right now. I just feel like I'm just imagining my poor little Rusty just sitting there on the floor, ODing off
end of life care for that dog.
Dogs love that stuff. Dogs love it.
It's a question from that doctor. It's right, because that's the question the patient would ask, and it's definitely a serious worry from doctors that we see on a daily basis, and that Professor Barnes trains on a regular basis.
I think for the doctors it's reassuring actually that you can't kill anyone.
Yeah, no, exactly.
You can't die of a cannabis overdosage. You can go psychotic and run after a bus, but in a proper scientific way, you can't die of cannabis, and that's really reassuring for a doctor. There's many drugs in the market that you can kill people with if you get the dose wrong.
There's the other side to it as well, which is so little is known about how much you can consume and then go about your day-to-day life. So how soon after you've had your medicine can you drive your car? Or can you go and work on your building site? Or all these different things that they're still trying to assess, and it's not just in the UK that's happening. Everywhere in the world, they're trying to work out how they can safely have people take this as a medicine and just still operate.
It's illegal to take like an amphetamine-based drug or an oxy and drive, isn't it?
Well, it is, but there are drugs which, as I was mentioning, amphetamines, like for instance, these phentermines.
Yeah. It's like a speed, isn't it?
Diethylpropions.
Yeah.
They are all amphetamines, and they are prescribed.
It's what they use for.
Prescriptions gain guidance as opposed to a law, right? They can say you shouldn't drive after that.
It's still illegal to drive with the THC in your system, won't it be?
Well, if you have a roadside test and they find cannabis in your system, then they probably will arrest you.
There's a real problem with that. In that, at the time the active effect has gone, let's say it's 8 hours or something, you can drive quite safely because it's gone from a psychoactive point of view. You're perfectly safe to drive, but you test it, it's still there, and it will be still there for several days. So we've got to think of some different system that relies, say, if someone at work in a safety critical job, they could have a cannabis medicine at the weekend, be perfectly safe in that job on the Monday morning, but if they tested, they'll fail because the THC particularly is still in the system. And that's another problem that the lawyers and the lawmakers have got to overcome.
Obviously, there's been a general election quite recently. There is a discussion about, what's next for that, and decriminalisation. I know it's slightly outside of this world, but it seems to be impacting. And everyone's got their view on legalisation, decriminalisation. Isn't that the solution?
I think we are going to legalize everything, to be very true. Who knows?
I think decriminalisation is a good idea. It depends who you talk to, but I mean, my personal perspective is that drug reform hasn't worked. Hasn't really worked in too many countries anywhere in the world. But actually, decriminalisation, if you go to places like Portugal, and even to a degree Canada, and their legal system on drugs, it's actually benefiting the population. There's better ways to monitor how people are consuming.
Exactly.
And you de-risk because you're taking away some of the black market.
So, I'm just thinking loud here, like if we are going to decriminalize it, won't these all people which were, put in prison for having 50 grams or something, they will sue them, So that's another thing. Maybe for medical purposes it is possible. For recreational, it won't.
I'm completely on your side. Like I'm more scared for the patients. I'm scared for people who are uneducated to have free rights over something which they don't understand. The same way that if all pharmaceuticals became prescription free, it would fucking terrify me. The fact that me and you can go and buy Oxy, not knowing what it can do to us, it literally terrifies me. Same with cannabis, I'm really, really, really scared for that one fragile little kid who's got some form of psychosomatic issue, some form of psychological issue where he's gonna end up having some form of brain trauma from smoking a high THC strain. I don't think that's necessary. And I also think medicalisation encourages education. Decriminalise it later, decriminalise it in 20 years' time, but it's important that the world actually understands what it's getting itself into. And, I should be an advocate and an activist for legalisation. The way I live my life, I really should be, but it's because of the mistakes I've seen people make over my life that I'm not for it. I'm really not for it.
For me, the decriminalisation for the cannabis market in this country is actually, in my perspective, the catalyst towards a better medical system. Because if you decriminalise, then suddenly you're going to find that lots of those patients that the NHS are so scared about coming into the NHS to get their medicine will actually find other routes to obtain it. So you'll decrease the pool of patients that will be looking to get cannabis.
You can have the California dispensary model though. So, like the pre-decriminalization cannabis dispensary model where the NHS doesn't have to worry about it, but you guys can actually do what you guys need to do. So you'll have 50, 60 other people like yourselves. And as opposed to you guys buying from Spain, from Italy and from here and from there, you guys will have your either your grow in the back or you'll have your 15 people like him who have their warehouses everywhere who you buy off, and you'll have your supply, and he will be regimented and you will be regimented, and the patient will end up getting the best of what's for the patient. Decriminalization means that me, you, Tom, Dick and Harry all get to have the same game. Now what happens is me, you, Tom, Dick and Harry all have different supply networks, but me, you, Tom, Dick and Harry all say it's the same. And then the patient ends up being in this shit world where they don't really know what's happening. They've got 5 different people saying they can all get exactly the same thing, slightly different prices, and there's no actual...
Isn't that what's happening in the black market now?
Exactly, and that's why I don't want that's what I don't think that's the way forward.
By decriminalising, surely that would open labs up, again remove that stigma, and labs
would do that,
that could test the product to make it safe for the consumer.
I guess the last thing I'm going to do is just quickly see if there's plenty more we could discuss. But if there's anything else that everyone wanted to add as a conversational point, just a statement, just to round things off. I appreciate we leaving it in the middle of a conversation, but I think there's a point at which we need to draw the line.
Yeah, so for me, again, coming back, there is a misconception about pharmaceuticals. As I said, that, there are various sources, animal, plant, and still it can fit in. The only thing is we have got to look at the way to do some clinical trials. I mean to say, I know somebody who was suffering with cancer. and gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors, which are very, very rare cancers. And they recovered using Rick Simpson's oil.
I've heard it many times.
So yeah, it's just, so there are these anecdotal experiences and everything. Until and unless we are not going to do double-blind, randomized, crossover, intent to treat, multi-center clinical studies, we can't convince MHRA. We can't do anything, and we have got to do, because it's an investigational entity anyway by NICE, so we can run those clinical trials and find out.
I think we have to play the game and play by the rules to show them that we can play by their games, to then suggest new rules. Because if we can't play by the rules that are already in place, how can they take us seriously with new rules? That's what I think.
I agree.
The rules in place are garbage, though. They're trying to play with the rules in place, these poor guys, man.
Well, I think my final thought on it, I mean, clearly the debate on this will go on for many years, and we're trying to move towards a position where all patients get access to the medicine they need. And I think that that's all well and good, and that will keep going on and on and on. Everyone's going to have a view, and things will move forward. We have to remember that we just started as an industry, and actually in 2020, we are going to see probably in the thousands of patients receiving medical cannabis. Yes, it will be on the private market, but we have to start somewhere, and that's where the market will go next year.
Mike?
Well, I think it comes back to what I said at the beginning. The priority now is to educate the doctors. If we're going to, for the moment, work in a medicalised system, then the only way to get people the medicine they need and deserve is to educate the doctors so they know what they're doing, they can be reassured about the risks and the benefits, and they can understand how to prescribe it. So I think all the arguments are good arguments, but it comes back to the one main overriding thing is educate the medical community to prescribe the stuff.
Sounds beautiful.
I couldn't agree more. It's unfortunately it's the way the system is, and it's education and the stigma removal we need to as well. A rebranding exercise.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I appreciate that everyone's busy, but this conversation and educating correctly and informing people the right way is really important to our cause. I think we all here agree that getting the right products, right drugs to patients is the most important thing, and making that more efficient and really understanding the products are what we're trying to do. But there's a process that we need to lead. And again, thank you so much. Look forward to speaking to you afterwards.